Curious George, Lost and Found. Read to you today by Gammy. It was the weekend, and George was excited. He and his friend had left the city for their country house. After a long drive, George was happy to arrive. He was looking forward to feeding the ducks. "Don't wander far, George," said the man with the yellow hat and their neighbor, Mr. Rinkin, who drove up to say hello. But someone else had wandered off, Mrs. Rinkin's chicks. George's friend offered to help them. Meanwhile, George headed toward the river. The river, George fed the ducks with his friend, Jumpy Squirrel. They found a raft that let them get closer to their duck friends. So close that George felt like a duck when he floated down the river. Uh-oh, the raft had drifted far away from the shore. George enjoyed his trip down the river with all of his hungry duck friends. But Jumpy was worried. They were lost, just like the chicks. The raft passed some crooked trees and a big rock that looked like a duck. The big duck rock made the ducks quack and George smiled. But Jumpy was too worried to sightsee. The sun was setting. How were they going to find their way back to the farm? When they reached a bend in the river, George and Jumpy spotted a silo. Hooray! It looked like the Rinkins' farm. They waited until the raft neared the shore. They jumped off and headed toward the silo. But it wasn't the right farm. The Rinkins' silo was red. They were still lost. They looked around. Nothing looked familiar except the big duck rock. It was a landmark. Maybe it would help them find their way home. George drew a map. He remembered the big duck rock, the crooked trees, and the silo at the Rinkins' farm. George also remembered that the sun set behind the red silo every night. George and Jumpy decided that they should follow the sun. It would help them find their way back to the farm, especially if they looked for landmarks along the way. As George and Jumpy walked back to the farm, Jumpy bumped into their friends who were lost, the chicks. The chicks did not understand how to use landmarks to navigate, but they were happy to follow the squirrel and the monkey back to the farm. At the farm, Mrs. Rinkin and the man with the yellow hat were surprised when George and Jumpy showed up with the chicks in tow. "George, weren't you supposed to be feeding the ducks?" asked the man with the yellow hat. George tried to explain, but it was easier just to let the chicks do all the squawking. The end. We have so much more to learn. Take a second and find your way. Create your own treasure map. You can build your own raft. Be blessed.